Hello and welcome to the Illini Audible Podcast. My name is Saeed Bravo. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the pod. As always, I really appreciate it. And today we're back with Cooper O'Kelly, my colleague at the Champagne Room, talking a little bit more about this Illinois. Now we're expanding this to Illinois athletics, and because we kind of have to talk about what we witnessed, what Illinois fans witnessed, what really the entire country witness on Saturday with Illinois taking down number 4 Purdue at Mackey Arena, and all of it in large part due to one freshman, Keaton Wagler. I know, Cooper, you were watching that game. Let's just react to what that game was and all that it was, because a lot to unpack.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you just obviously have to start with the elephant in the room. Just kind of wow, that was unbelievable. It really felt like, especially down the stretch of the game, like Keaton just was not missing. I don't know if you saw the Jake Davis comments after the game. I'm gonna leave out the profanity, but he was just like, yeah, this dude, we could just tell he was on another level. It was pretty crazy.
No question. It was really just an insane kind of thing to witness. Obviously, I was at the game, Cooper. I know you were watching the broadcast, so I will have questions about what you saw from that vantage point, because there's obviously things you miss as a writer. Sometimes you're writing down things and you look up and something's already happened. But no, I unfortunately had to leave for the post game availabilities because of the weather. But still, I was on all over socials during the ride back, and every reaction that you got was pretty warranted. This MFer, was not missing. We had to give him the ball. All of that stuff was so warranted, because this game was so beyond everything that you could have expected as an Illini fan. Because coming into this game, I don't know about you, Cooper. I mean, you saw Purdue was coming off a loss at UCLA. They obviously a team that's super hyped up pre-game, and also a team that's just been so on top of the Big Ten. And then to come into Mackey Arena, an arena that had really is, it's insane. Like the magnitude of that place and how fans make the atmosphere was pretty remarkable. Like I couldn't believe that is where you have to play if you're any opposing team. And I can't imagine being a West Coast, East Coast team coming into that building and playing that team. Just a remarkable all-around performance, and especially just Keaton Wagler, obviously, literally did not miss multiple heat checks that it just did not go. There were some shots that were near half court that this dude just was not missing, as you were saying.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, 46 points, I believe. That's the most that a visiting player has ever scored in the history of Mackey Arena, which, like you were kind of touching on, that's probably a top 3 venue in college basketball that you don't want to go play in. It's hard to go win on the road against Purdue. And like you were saying, this is the spot as an Illini fan where you're nervous, right? You're missing your best defender on the perimeter. You're going up against one of college basketball's most dynamic guards in Braden Smith, without Kylan Boswell, who, on top of being your top perimeter defender, is also your second leading scorer. And you're like, well, what are we going to do like that? This is going to be a really tough matchup. You said it, Purdue coming off a loss. They needed to win that game. You can't lose 2 in a row, especially one at home. And, obviously it's hard not to rely on Keaton and how well he played, but I also feel like just as a unit, things just looked really cohesive, and you didn't see a lot of remarkable, one-off performances. I mean, obviously Wagler outscored the rest of his teammates combined, so that kind of explains a little bit of it, but I don't think that Stojakovic played insane,
No.
right? His stat line was not good.
It was not good.
Big fall down from the previous game. Tomislav didn't have a point up until the last 4 minutes of the second half or something crazy like that. But I feel in terms of offensive production, open guys were still being found. I think offensive rebounding was a huge factor. It was a bit frustrating, especially watching from home from my couch, watching the broadcast when they do these replay compilations of a possession where Illinois has, like, one is standing out right now. They had 3 or 4 offensive rebounds in that
Yes,
same
yeah,
possession, and they're kicking it out to wide open Jake Davis, wide open Hummerkaus, and they're just missing from 3. And it was
yeah,
just so frustrating because, especially early in that game when it's tight or Illinois is down by, I want to say as many as like 9-10 points.
10.
It was real frustrating to see those misses, but I really think, like I said, they brought it all together and were more of like a cohesive unit by the end of the game. And
Yeah,
maybe that's kind of the benefit of trying to learn how to play without Kylan.
yeah, no question. I think to add to a little bit of what you were saying, that first half, it just nothing was working besides Keaton Wagler. Keaton Wagler obviously carried the team on Saturday, but the biggest thing that you notice is, yeah, that's right. The offensive rebounding was in a huge factor. I felt I sent something out at halftime. There was one thing that was going to there are two things that were going to have to carry you to the finish line of that game, and it ended up working. It ended up unfolding that way. The offensive rebounding, you had to be on top of that, and you also had to make your threes. Now, you mentioned it; they a lot of those threes were just not falling throughout a large portion of that game. But really, by the end of it, when they really needed everybody to step up at the same time, and I feel like this has been covered extensively by a lot of outlets, but those 4 back-to-back 3-pointers that Tommy Merkovich and Jake Davis, knocked down towards the final 2 minutes of that game, incredibly crucial. And also credit to Wagler for having the maturity and understanding that, while he is hot and he could continue to break records even more, has had that maturity even for a freshman to say, no, I'm going to make, quote, this is what Brett Underwood says, make the right basketball decision and kick it out to one of my guys. And that's exactly what happened. And you saw that result in an exhilarating win, what was really a historic win. And just to give you a little bit more context on this, on like how many records Keaton Wagler broke on that singular game, the most points scored in a road win over a top 10 opponent in AP poll history. This 46 points against the top 10 team. The last guy to do it, a guy named Malik Monk, scored 47 against number 7 North Carolina back in 2016. Wagler's 46, the most against a top 5 team on the road since Buddy Hield did it back in 2016 again. And then he set the Illinois freshman scoring record, which I think that was probably like the easiest one for him to knock down. It was 35 points by George. I don't even know how to spell his. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. But Georgie Belzhan ish. Really, I probably totally butchered that, but excuse me for that. And then he tied the second most points by a freshman in a Big Ten game since at least 2010, 2011. That's by Illinois Athletics. And then he's second in points scored by an Illinois period. And he's behind Dave Downey, who did it against Indiana back in 63. So absolutely ridiculous, absolutely historic. I don't even know how many of these I just knocked down, like how many I just said, but this was insane. And so we can totally, what's it called? I can't stop glowing about this guy because it was insane performance. But yeah, back to the prior point that this team, credit to this team, while a lot of it was shaky early in the start, it felt like things really came together towards the end. And instead of it being a last second win where it's like you had a block or someone missed a 3 from Purdue, it ended up being really kind of comfortable in the final 30 seconds.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially with, just the way that the college basketball landscape is set up and how, you look at obviously March Madness postseason tournaments, conference championship tournaments, these are all single elimination things. If you lose, if you're a team that is heavily reliant on one guy and that one guy doesn't perform well,
Yeah.
You lose, you're done. Your season's over. And I think what Illinois has been showing throughout this season is they have the depth and they have the weapons to show that, hey, if Andre Stojakovic doesn't play well, we can still win. If Kylan Boswell goes down, we can still win. If Keaton has an off night, we can still win. So I think, like, obviously, like, can't say enough about how impressive that was from Keaton. The emotional and physical maturity at such a young age is remarkable. But for me, it just makes me even more excited as to how this team can just keep growing and keep expanding and keep winning in the coming months.
There's no question. I think one important thing that Brad Underwood mentioned in his previous presser, I think this was after the Maryland game, how the calculus kind of changes without one of your stars. That's Kylan Boswell, obviously missing the next month of games, but foreseeably, because of his surgery, because of a successful surgery, will come back ahead of what could potentially be a March Madness run. Now, obviously, you mentioned it. I mean, this tournament is something of a cultural phenomenon in how it's a one game, single elimination game, and the variance inside of this game could you could have a potentially a record breaking season as a program and get down, be eliminated in the first game simply because of variance, simply because you're playing on a random Tuesday, right? Whatever. Anyways, my larger point is that Brad Underwood said that. I think sometimes people forget that back in that TSJ season, back in when they made that Elite Eight run, when TSJ was out, that there were a lot of adjustments that had to be made by that team, and they were able to navigate that situation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that when TSJ came back, that those changes weren't still considered. That this is exactly what you say. If you learn how to win without one of your stars, imagine what it can be when your star comes back. It doesn't necessarily mean that things have to go back. It means that now you've learned much more about your team, much more about the way your roster is constructed, and that then you can navigate, that situation much better, and you could potentially, splice up your type of performances, your game plans, and to make them tailored to your opponent. And I think that's such a valuable tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, even like you said, even when your player comes back, like the learning experiences and the changes you had to make, that sticks with you. So let's say they are in the first round of the NCAA tournament and Kylan gets into foul trouble early. Now, if he has to go take a seat on the bench, not everyone's going to be scrambling around, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to defend with their top perimeter guy out, because they've learned to do it. And it's going to be coming against quality opponents as well. Like, I'm sure that all Illini fans kind of thought that as soon as Kylan went down, right? That it came at an unfortunate time where you have to travel to Purdue, you have to travel to Nebraska. I think he's still going to be out by the time they take on Michigan State and maybe even Wisconsin. So it's obviously still unfortunate, but like we both said, like, there's certainly lessons and, like, big learning moments that you can take away from times like this. And if you can keep stringing together wins also, that obviously helps as well.
Yeah. No question. The thing is about this, I always hesitate to make declarations about certain teams, especially in college basketball. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier that the variance once March hits, it is unlike any other postseason tournament. Like, the closest thing that comes to it is maybe baseball, because of October is October is its own thing. March in that way is its own thing and makes it so much more interesting because it's single elimination. But I always hesitate to declare a team, to be a contender for, what seems to be such a confusing tournament. This, to me, this statement win was just unlike, this is a statement win is what I'm trying to say. This puts Illinois on the map for a team that not only is catapulted now into the top 5, top 6, whatever you want to put it, but as a team that is potentially going to be looked at, it should be looked at and should be taken seriously as a team that can make their threes, that can be an offensive rebounder, that looks for those always looks to put, 3 is more than 2. I'm going to always try to put more points on the board and have that be this is a team that is going to be not only a Big Ten contender, but a significant March favorite in come March.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think like you look at all those metrics that championship teams have had over the past 10 years. Yeah, of course, KenPom, they're top with what is it? Championship teams have to be top 19 offensively, top 25 defensively, something along those lines. And obviously they're meeting those. I think, in terms of the 3-point shooting, like it can get frustrating, and like that, I think especially makes your team a little bit more, I don't want to say risky, but like success can be a little more volatile, because if your threes aren't going in, then your offensive production is going to take a big hit. But I think like in terms of the past couple of years, I think this is the best rebounding Illinois team that we've seen, and that is going to help a ton, especially, to kind of coincide with that Tyler Underwood offense of kind of getting pro NBA style shots with threes and perimeter shots.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so excited to just continue watching this team develop and continue to grow in the way that because I do think that there are certain parts of this season where it's like you're going to have to determine whether or not, how much you want to use certain parts of your guys, right? Because Keaton Wagler isn't going to drop 46 every night, obviously. But you should, if you're an Illini fan, you should be encouraged. And I think the statistics do align with what you want to see from this team, because I think in the past, you're at this point in the season and you still have questions about whether or not this team is serious or not. And you're fortunate enough that this season, because every season, because of the portal and because of NIL, is such a crapshoot, that you do feel encouraged about where your team is headed and where your team could potentially end up.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, especially in today's world of college basketball, it's tough to kind of forecast where you're going to be year in, year out. But I personally wouldn't be too surprised if we see a little bit of continuity, and it's hard to look so far in advance, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see like the Ivisic is coming back next year. Maybe Stojakovic stays for another year. Like I would not be surprised if this is a team, kind of a core that can continue growing together. You're muted.
We hope to see that, because when you see a bunch of these teams end up being I think that the biggest thing, one of the biggest things in college basketball is that when you have retention, when you have a core that comes back, that builds that experience. We saw that with the Elite Eight team, had significant guys who had significant time on task together. That's when you have teams that really can make a run, and when they're older guys as well. But what's going to make it harder is that you're probably in all likelihood not going to have one Keaton Wagler. What do you think about his whole meteoric rise? Because his story has been really something of legend. As a guy that came under-recruited as a 3-star recruit from Kansas, not even offered from his own school or from his own state, right? At Kansas, and a guy who was really overlooked and suddenly comes here and explodes. I personally, when I heard all this chatter, all this hype about this Keaton Wagler kid, I think before we were even saying his name was Keaton Wagler, because we didn't even know how to spell it. We didn't even know how to pronounce his name. Like, now you see him, and when I was hearing all of that noise and chatter inside of the Ubin Center, I remember going to media day, local media day, and the constant was that he's for real. And it was almost laughable how everybody in the building was really, really fixated on how this kid is really, really good. And to see that come to fruition, but not only to see that come to fruition, but see that unfold the way that it has, is just a remarkable story. Now you're talking about a guy, like, I remember our colleague at the Champagne Room, Elliot Casey, telling me in the press box at State Farm Center during one of the early games of the season, hey, this kid could be a top 5 pick. And I don't know, I kind of scoffed at it, because I was like, this is really early to be overreacting to a kid who is a freshman, wasn't highly recruited, but now you seriously have to look at this guy who could eclipse what his predecessors from last season were as late first-round draft picks. Now this is a dude who you have your eyes on if you're a national pundit.
Yeah, 100% in terms of surpassing the guys from last year. 100%. If he ends up declaring for that NBA draft, he's going to be a lottery pick. 100% higher than KJ, than Will Riley, who both had a good amount of national attention surrounding them as well. And to kind of touch on the under-recruited aspect of it, his only major offers were Illinois and Minnesota. Illinois is the first major offer he had. And I think I tweeted this after one of the first games of the season, just like, how did Bill Self let Keaton Wagler leave the state of Kansas? How does that happen? He's Mr. like the Gatorade Basketball Player of the Year, Mr. Basketball for the state, doesn't get offered by a team that he's probably grown up watching his entire life. And then obviously ends up coming to Illinois, has completely changed the narrative around himself. And in terms of like looking at him from an NBA scout perspective, what is there not to like? He's lengthy, he can shoot, he's really, really competent with the ball in his hands. He can shoot from range. You see him pull up from way behind the arc. He's been unbelievable. And you struggle to call something like this luck, right? Because you want to say that sure, Brad knows what he's doing and these college basketball teams know what they're doing, but might have got a little bit lucky here in landing an unbelievable player.
Sometimes, and listen, March is all about luck, which technically transitive property you would say that college basketball is all about luck. Sometimes you got to get lucky, man. And it really feels like they really, really scored the lottery here. I mean, think about the impact that people thought that Petrovic was going to have on this team, the impact that Stojakovic was going to have on this team. Those are the two guys that you circled from that position, that guard position, that you said, hey, these are going to be the guys who are going to be your guys. He totally ended up being eclipsed by one Keaton Wagler, and you just feel so impressed about it. You're just excited about what it could be, and potentially if it ends up being that this is a guy who maybe has to take a shot maybe next season as, a firm lottery pick next season. Maybe this year he didn't get to that, he didn't eclipse that gray area of being firmly a lottery pick. Who knows if this guy could stay perhaps one more year. I know maybe this is a reach, but if he could stay one more year, then you're cooking if you're Illinois, if you're Brad Underwood. But I want to do a quick flip to football. This is a football podcast, and obviously we've talked about football extensively on this podcast. Cooper, there's been a lot of things that have gone down for Illinois football, and a lot of it, is interesting, to say the least, because suddenly a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier, that I was talking about in previous iterations of this podcast, surrounded the idea that if you can retain a lot of guys, especially the guys that made an impact and in that bowl game, then you really don't feel too bad about where this team could be headed in 2026. But man, ever since then, there's been 26 guys that have transferred, that have chosen to hit the portal, and that's not including the guys who are out of eligibility. So this will be an Illinois football team that will be very, very different. And I've gone ahead and categorized guys that you could have expected, right? Like these are guys that you lost that you could have expected. And then some of the guys that they hurt significantly, maybe, but you could have seen it happen, right? You could have seen it coming. And there were the ones that, man, these guys, maybe you didn't expect it, came out of nowhere, but this really hurts and this stinks for this Illinois football program. And I will go ahead and list them off. The losses that you kind of expected, right? Tight end Cole Rusk, Kurt Neal, right? Justin Bullock, who, ended up being a guy who was a end zone target, but maybe is looking for significantly more playing time at a lower level. Alexander Kapka-Jones, who's been here for a while. Offensive lineman Tyler McMillan, who didn't eclipse that starting role. Wide receiver Ashton Hollins, cornerback Caleb Patterson, who got beaten out several times in that secondary as a cornerback Tyson Rooks, and then a couple other guys who really weren't big players on that team, who will end up being guys who probably hit a lower level. Jake Furtney, Kellen Francis, Vernon Woodyard, Jeremiah Warren, Easton Baker, and quarterback Trey Petty. And then the other guy, obviously we heard about this during the season, Malik Elzy, who was a guy who ended up actually transferring to LSU, who we'll see what his role ends up being there. I don't suspect that maybe, who knows, but you wouldn't really suspect based on the trajectory of his career that he will be a big star over there. And these are the ones that hurt, but you could have seen it coming, right? David Olano, as a guy who, I mean, a kicker who was at the top of his game in the Big Ten, who deservedly, got a shot at a team that will probably end up being a college football playoff contender in Texas A&M. I have Kurt Neal twice on here. Ethan Hampton, who I thought maybe had a shot of staying, and obviously once we'll hit on the guys the guys that were additions. But as a guy who was in the system for a year, I think that certainly hurts. But you expected because of what happened after the season concluded. Malachi Hood, as a guy that made somewhat of an impact in that linebacker room, as depth, we'll look at for other opportunities in the portal. And wide receiver Mario Sanders, who I believe he had one touchdown this season, but a guy who served as depth there. These are the guys that really hurt. Sabor Kareem, who ended up being a guy who was depth, but a dude who they admitted was about to hit a redshirt year and then ended up playing his full season. Now you wonder if he regrets it because of him choosing to go to the portal. And I think that was a guy who you were expecting him to have a big role on this team in 2026. JoJo Hayden, who had somewhat of an impact in that linebacker room. Again, I thought that he was on the short list of guys who was going to have an impact in 2026. Defensive line, Angelo McCullum. This is a dude who Illinois was really high on, who ended up having those starter reps. They were giving him the starter reps, I think, in hopes that he would become a guy who ended up being that starting nose tackle for them this season. Now you have a huge hole there. Tomiwa Dorijaje, who obviously has a history of jumping from program to program, but a guy who I thought if you kept him for another year, maybe you could see him eclipse as a guy who would have a big role on this team. And then Eli Conan, who had who was impactful in that bowl game. Now a guy who you look to replace. Those are the guys, and that was a long list of dudes who left. What do you make of all of that, Cooper?
Yeah, I mean, like you kind of kicked this off by saying it's just a lot. It's a lot of new people. It's a lot of new faces. I mean, you hear it from the first couple of press conferences of 2026. I've heard it from just like talking to players that I see around. Like, it's a lot of new faces. It's a lot of new people. It's weird. It's different. Which, I mean, I hate to overuse this term, but in today's kind of college sports landscape, it's not overly surprising. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be a lot of adjustments. I think, especially if you look at that D line room, that's going to be pretty much starting over from scratch almost. Yeah. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to necessarily be a unit that is bad or underperforms, but it makes it a lot harder when you have to completely kind of flip over and restart, especially with not a ton of returning players. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much my big takeaway.
I think that it's so unfortunate that, especially that defensive line, because you haven't seen a lot of production from that side of the ball. I think for the past season and a half, I don't think that's I don't think that's a stretch to say. And I do question how, because this coaching staff is always so high on the coaching that happens in that room, and just everything that goes on in there. I do question how it is that you haven't seen all that much production, and you still haven't you haven't been able to retain a lot of guys there, but you've also, you've struggled there, and so I really struggle to kind of put the pieces together and explain how this, I don't know, how this continues to happen. I think this really puts it over for me, because they always rave about a lot of the attention to detail that Terrence Jamison has on that as a DL coach, as the defensive line coach, being that co-defensive coordinator. But I don't really see that, like, on the field. The results aren't translating, and it just, you don't get the best. I personally, because of specifically how many guys on that defensive line left, I just don't get the best vibe from it. But obviously, it is the name of the game. I just do think it's really unfortunate, because last season there was a lot of retention, and maybe you hope that maybe that was because of the coaching staff, because of how confident the players feel in that coaching staff and how comfortable they've gotten in Champaign. But now in retrospect, you kind of look at it and I think you say maybe that was because you saw that Gabe Akers was coming back, that you had a quarterback, that you had a core, and that you had a returning offensive line. Those are the trenches is really where this Illinois football team is going to struggle. Now, you do have signings, a lot of significant signings, especially in that quarterback position we will talk about soon. But I do want to touch on, like, how much potential turbulence there will be for that defensive line and the offensive line, simply because of how much change and how ravaged it is at the moment. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it a little bit earlier. It's just,
Yeah.
it's going to be difficult when you have to start off fresh like that. I know, especially, actually, both units, they're throwing in a lot of guys from the transfer portal, which I'm fine with. I was pretty happy actually with the guys that they were able to go out and get, especially at that offensive line. But it might be hard going from a unit that had been together for 3 years, 2 straight years at least, some of them 3, and had really grown together and formed kind of like a tight bond, especially with their quarterback included. So it's going to be an adjustment, I think, from that unit as a whole. It just might look different. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. I just think it's going to take some different efforts during camp, during spring ball, over the summer. Like, it's just going to be a different feeling off season, I think, than we're used to having, especially considering, the cohesiveness and the retention, I don't know, just the kind of run it back mentality that we saw coming into this previous season.
As of 5 days ago, Illinois signed 17 guys from the transfer portal. You mentioned the offensive line: Christian Martin from Colorado State and Jake Renfro from Wisconsin. 2 guys who you probably feel pretty good about because of the fact that they do come from higher level schools. Obviously, Wisconsin, a Big Ten school, and then you have Colorado State, which is a pretty good program. But in terms of the level of competition that they play against, but you also have you obviously have a lot of depth that is being added in the wide receiver room, defensive line room. You have an interesting returner in Ethan Macholski, who has that 59-yard record that he notched back in 2024 with Illinois, who makes his return to Illinois after a stint back at home in Washington. But the headliner, Cooper, Keaton Wagler from East Carolina. What do you make of, this is a dude who is a 1 year, will be here for 1 year, who thrives on the Temple offense, which is a lot of what we've seen in over the past 2-3 years, where Luke Altmaier, obviously not the same quarterback, but an offense that really thrived under the Tempo, threw for 6,438 yards, 43 touchdowns, ran for 15 touchdowns. but also a former Michigan State quarterback who had a rough time back then in the Big Ten, but now makes his return and hopeful to make an impact on this Illinois football team. What do you make of his addition to this roster?
I was really happy with it. I think that, adding a guy with a lot of experience, he has experience at the Big Ten level, 2 really solid seasons at East Carolina, led his team to bowl games in back-to-back years, is capable of, throwing the ball all over the field. I'm happy with it, right? You need kind of a stop bridge type of guy who can kind of get you going from Luke Altmaier, take a little break. And we talked about this, I think last time I was on, we were talking about it with the concept of potentially Ethan Hampton starting next season. Yeah. It's kind of like a stopgap kind of guy before you turn the keys over to maybe your quarterback of the future. And I think that he's going to be – Keaton Wagler, I think, is more than capable of leading Illinois back to another solid bowl game season. He's a dynamic threat on the ground. Probably maybe not quite as the level as Luke was, but kind of comparable to that. And, that just adds another layer to your offense that makes you more difficult to defend. And, yeah, quality passer. I don't know. I was a really big fan of this signing.
Yeah, I do think you're right. I definitely I think you prefer a guy who was starting all of last season to come in and in that sense you do feel good about this quarterback. I do think that there would have been a value in having Ethan Hampton who was already in the system. Obviously that's no longer going to happen, but this is a dude with a huge arm, and I think that's a common theme now that this Illinois football team wants a guy with a huge arm that can go for a deep ball, chase that explosive. And this is a guy who will help you get to that point. Now, obviously, there will be challenges for this quarterback because of how short of a tenure he will have here. But you do feel hopeful because it's not like a full new offensive system as well. For now, at least, you do have your offensive coordinator who returns, and that is also a huge part of the equation. But I do also want to talk a little bit about how important this guy's announcement of his return is. This is one Khalil Valentine, who I personally thought his tenure at Illinois was in jeopardy because of the loss of his running backs coach, Thad Ward, who ended up going to Kansas, had another opportunity there at Kansas State, and I think he got a promotion there, moving up in the coaching ladder. But Khalil Valentine makes his return for a third season in Champaign. Huge, huge, huge. So important to have this guy because this is a dude who showed a lot of flashes in 2025. I would argue it was the RB1 at certain points in the season. Now will fully be that guy in 2026. What do you make of that, Cooper?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely agree with what you had to say about being the RB1. It felt like, especially down the stretch, the latter half of the season, he was the go-to guy from that backfield. And I mean, in terms of just like what you can see it on the field, he was probably the most electric guy that you had out there on that offense, capable of making guys miss, super fast. And yeah, like you said, I wasn't 100% certain he was going to stick around, but I sure am happy that he is. And I wouldn't be surprised to see his role continue to increase this season.
Yeah.
And I think, he has the capability to score a ton of touchdowns rushing and also catch passes out of the backfield, turn them into long gains. So big time retention.
Yeah, no question, especially when you have a quarterback that will be relatively new in the system, that might not have the most comfortability in the early Big Ten games, that makes his return to the big stage in the Big Ten, that might not have the same weapons that Luke Altmaier had back in 2024 and 2025 and all other 2023 as well. You could probably include that as well. I think there is expectation that there will be significant turbulence in 2026 for this Illinois football team. But you do feel good about where I think you feel good in terms of where the offense stands. I think you can feel confident about it. There's still a lot of things that have to happen for, fans in Illinois, for you guys, for Illinois fans, for everybody to feel confident about where this team is headed, just generally, because the defense was so bad, because there haven't been that many changes other than losing a lot of guys on that defensive side of the ball. But right now, and I know it's really early, Cooper, what is it? How do you, I guess, where do you stand with this football team? And you will be here. You will be covering this Illinois football team for next season. What is your level of, I don't know. What is your level of, I don't want to say excitement, but what is your expectation early? Obviously, it's super early, but what is your level of expectation, I guess?
I feel like I've come away kind of more impressed and more confident over the past, couple weeks, close to a month or so, just because, we haven't touched on it, but, getting Matthew Bailey to come back, getting Xavier Scott to come back, Torrey Cox is coming back. Like, that DB room is going to be still very solid. I think, obviously it's tough when you might not have, you're going to have new guys at the D line that might not be attacking the quarterback super fast. We don't know. Jury's still out on that. But I think getting those guys back, especially X and Matt Bailey, they're going to be leaders for this team. They're going to be, captains, I'm sure, on that defensive side. And, I personally thought that neither of them were coming back. So I think that was a pretty big retention. So I'm confident about that. In terms of the offense, you lose Bowick, you lose Hank Beatty, which is tough because, in terms of the red zone, Bowick is your go-to guy. Hank Beatty was felt like Altmaier's number one target for most of the season. But I think that, Jaysean Platt, transfer out of FAU, wide receiver, I think he's going to kind of be able to slide into that Hank Beatty slot role pretty well. Pretty fast guy. Had a ton of kick return and punt return yards at FAU, so maybe he'll assume that role as well. I think, he's going to be a pretty competent, maybe even above average type of run after the catch guy. So I think that was another big get to kind of try and fulfill that production in some way, shape, or form. I've already touched on I'm happy with the Keaton Hauser get. I think that's going to be pretty good as well. Overall expectations, I feel good. I'm cautiously optimistic. How about that?
Okay.
I think they're going to be bowl eligible. I could see maybe 8 wins, which I think is pretty solid in a retooling type year.
Yeah, it definitely will be that. There's a couple guys though that you do feel good about, right? And pending everything continues to go the way that it looks like it's going. Obviously, Colin Dixon, a dude who was this past season was a sophomore and I think you could argue was like a wide receiver 2 or 3 that obviously Hank Beatty had a lot of, had a large part of the production, obviously, but still a guy that had a lot of production and will have to continue stepping up this upcoming season. Braden Trimble, as a dude who made a lot of waves early in the spring last year, didn't see the field at all this season, but I think you can see that changing in this upcoming season. I'd be really excited to see him play as a prospect that the type of prospect that he was. And then obviously Hudson Clement, who in the latter part of the season was a dude who was like, okay, he's heating up, and this is, the season's over. So we unfortunately don't get to see more of him. But you do hopefully get to see him more in 2026 and, another level, obviously not the same quarterback, but like I continue to mention, that same system, to have that comfortability in year 2, I think is really, really important. But any and you don't have to answer this, but any guys that you do feel, maybe 1 or 2 guys who you feel like, oh shit, this guy could make an impact. This guy, I'm really excited to look for this guy. Do you have any guy at the top of your head?
Yeah, Hudson Clement, who you just mentioned, I'm really excited to see him just continue growing. I feel like I've wrote maybe 2 or 3 full stories about how he's starting to break out towards the tail end of that season. And you hope that's something that he's able to sustain with the new QB and that it wasn't just a better connection with Luke. But we saw it. I mean, he had a couple of just unbelievable catches throughout the season. Pretty solid catch radius, is able to track the ball well through the air. And even on early downs too, I think he's going to be a weapon for sure. And I don't know, another guy, I'm trying to think. I mean,
I have one for you if I could interrupt you.
Yeah, go for it.
Underrated guy, Nathan Knapik, who started in the offensive line in the bowl game, made a huge impact there. I think he was replacing I forget, but he was a really important guy in that offensive line. If he continues to go that trajectory, then he could be a guy that you feel really, really good about going into 2026. But man, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a cop-out answer, but I'm just really excited for another year of Matt Bailey. I mean, it's a guy that, as a member of the media, I feel like is super easy to root for. Always gave the best responses, was more than willing to speak honestly and truthfully with the media. Just seems like an all-around great guy. And I think coming back fully healthy, he's going to make a full recovery from this shoulder surgery he had. At least all indications are pointing towards that. And I think, he puts out another solid, really good season for a Big Ten level safety. You're going to see him get drafted in probably maybe round 3, round 4, which I think is a pretty impressive accomplishment for sure.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Cooper. I really, really appreciate it. Cooper, thank you. What will the rest of the day look like for you on this fine Monday morning that we don't have class for?
Yeah, so that part was nice. Got to sleep in a little bit. First class got canceled. Had an online lecture. Then I started doing this. I think I'm heading over to the Stevie J Broadcasting Studios to help out with the drive. So that'll be fun. Radio show here in Champaign-Urbana. And then, I'm seeing Marty Supreme tonight. Never seen it before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, going to the theaters. I'm excited.
There you go, Cooper. Well, we love it. Continue doing what you're doing. We will catch everyone on the next one. Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe, rate, review if you so please, and peace.